Chapter 21, Tallon 4, Final Battles. You just left him there? Twilight asked in shock. I didn't exactly have a choice, Samus replied. I couldn't move him without his help, and he was perfectly safe. Nothing could have gotten to him in there except the elite pirates, and there weren't any of them left according to the data I'd acquired. Any other type of pirate would have disintegrated trying to get in, as would any of the various types of Metroids. The only way anything could hurt him in there is if they brought in their machines, and there wasn't enough phasing in the pit to warrant that, unless something drew their attention. I was last seen in there, so if I wasn't soon seen elsewhere, the pirates would be investigating. The best way to keep him safe was to draw a great deal of attention to myself elsewhere. So you went out and blasted everything in sight? Rainbow asked eagerly. Almost everything, Samus replied. I needed to be sure reports of my movements got back. I made sure a few pirates, very few, made it to safety to report. On my way, I was also able to pick up the last Chozo artifact, the artifact of Newborn. After that, I knew it was time to head back to the impact crater to undo the seal. On the way back, I stopped at my ship to rearm, record information, and to see if there was any sort of jury rigging I could do to load Spike on board at his current size. Unfortunately, I didn't find anything. Oh, Pinky gasped, bouncing up and down. Is this where Spike learned how to change his size? Weren't you the one going on about spoilers earlier? Applejack asked with a raised eyebrow. I was? Pinky gasped. But this isn't really a spoiler. He obviously made it off planet somehow. Samus chuckled. Well, not quite yet. But I did pick up some unusual energy back at the Phazon mines. I assumed it was Spike, so I sent him a signal to meet me back at the impact crater. He didn't respond, but I did get a signal back that he'd received the message. How come you didn't respond? Fluttershy asked Spike curiously. Spike smiled nostalgically as he spread his wings gently. The look on his face made Rainbow chuckle knowingly. Well, Spike began. Spike slowly climbed out of the pool of Phazon as he awoke. A space pirate walking by took one look at him, bowed low, and began babbling in their native tongue. Spike didn't understand a word, and the noise was giving him a headache. He snarled and glowered at the pirate. It immediately fell silent and fled. Spike blinked a bit at that. That wasn't how the pirates normally behaved around him. Normally, they'd be trying to attack him. What had changed? Shrugging the thought aside, he shook the stray Phazon from his body and looked upward. He could tell the sky was just beyond the rock. The sky, he wanted it. Inhaling, he drew a great deal of Phazon into his maw, mixing it with his dragon fire. When he exhaled, the blast of blue-green-white heat tore the rock apart, leaving a clear path to the sky. At some level, he knew that would draw attention, but he didn't care. The communicator in his ear beeped, and he heard Samus telling him to meet him at the impact crater. Reaching up, he pressed the button on the communicator to send the message received signal. He didn't want to talk just now. He didn't want to taint the moment. His eyes locked on the sky, he spread his new wings, and leapt. "Aw, yeah," Rainbow said happily, pumping her fist. "First flight! You never forget that moment!" "Yeah!" Scootaloo breathed, hovering in lazy circles around Rainbow's head, still reveling in her own recently gained flight. Chuckling, Rainbow caught her by her tail and pulled her into a hug. Spike chuckled. "Yeah, it was amazing! I'm not sure how long I flew. I just knew how to do it, and I had to. I had to get in the air. It was calling me." "About a half hour," Samus pointed out. "Eh?" Spike asked. "That's how long you were in the air before you showed up in the nick of time at the impact crater," Samus explained. "Knowing that the signal received message was just before you leapt into the air told me exactly how long that first flight was." "Pretty good time for first flight," Rainbow pointed out. "Why'd you stop? Wings got tired?" Spike chuckled. "Let Mom tell you, you're going to love it." As everyone turned to face Samus, she grinned, leaning forward. "It all started as I reached the impact crater. As Samus returned to the seal of the impact crater, the artifacts resonated, embedding themselves in the 12 statues built to hold them. Their energies poured into the central spire, releasing a massive spear of light into the sky as the path to the Phazon meteorite was unsealed, the path to the prison of the Great Worm, the one the pirates called Metroid Prime. Before Samus could enter the portal, however, a loud roar was heard, and Meta Ridley swept the top off the central spire with his wing, causing it to explode, resealing the gate. As he came back around for another attack with energy bombs, however, a bolt of purple and green from the sky slammed into him like the wrath of a god, knocking him so far off his flight path that his bombs hit the Phazon mines. Yeehaw! Apple Bloom shouted out, startling everyone who had been listening with such rapt attention. Go get him, Spike! Show that naughty varmint what for! Apple Bloom, Applejack scolded. We're trying to listen! Besides, Discord added, with Spike, it's bound to be all the way up to what 7? He pointed playfully to each of Spike's claws, wings, and his tail in succession. Samus chuckled. Actually, most of the rest of that fight is better told from Spike's perspective. There was something going on up there I didn't quite catch. Spike grinned. Okay, I'll take it from there. He glanced towards the Crusaders. But no interruptions. They nodded earnestly, and Spike continued. Ridley recovered quickly from the impact, though surprised that the double hind claw strike had buckled his armor on his side. Still, a classic avian assault. He rounded on his foe, and his eyes widened. He was facing another dragon, masters of the sky and flame. Unlike himself, this one wore no armor and carried no weapons save those that nature had given him. What? Ridley demanded. Why does one dragon interfere with another? Spike hovered there, maintaining position. Leave my mother alone, Spike stated bluntly, his eyes glowing with rage. What? Ridley roared, exhaling a blast of flame that Spike's side slipped to evade. A dragon allows a human to assert such dominance? You debase yourself in our mighty race by kowtowing to that mongrel? Ridley didn't see the strike coming. One moment, Spike was facing him in the air. The next, Spike had lost altitude, and Ridley was clutching his beak and spitting teeth from an unexpected tail strike. Don't talk about my mother like that, Spike growled, flames on his breath. With a snarl, Ridley lunged forward. The battle was not entirely in Spike's favor. He was young and well trained, and had strong instincts. He also had incredibly durable scales. However, this was his first aerial battle, and he did not fully understand three-dimensional combat. Ridley was not quite as young, and the heavy tinkering he'd undergone, along with all the tech fused to his body, made it harder for him to recover from damage taken. However, he was a veteran combatant with years of experience under his wings, even if this was the first time he'd ever fought another dragon. The metal armor he wore was also tough enough to deflect Spike's claws, for the most part. After several high-speed exchanges of flame, claw swipes, and tail strikes, Ridley managed to get above Spike and dove in, digging his claws into the younger dragon's back. Spike roared in pain as the metal-clad claws dragged across his flesh, ripping his scales apart. Foolish whelp! Ridley barked. You know not your own weaknesses. Ridley dug away, trying to get to the flight tendons that allowed the wings to flap. If those were cut, Spike would fall to his death. However, Spike carried one advantage both from his blood, his many growth spurts from ingested Phazon, and his training with Samus. He was nothing if not adaptable. Reaching up, he grabbed Ridley's crocodile-like beak in one claw and squeezed it shut. And you talk too much, Spike growled, yanking him off his back. Ridley struggled, dragging all four sets of claws and his tail along Spike's body, leaving deep gashes above and below the wings that wept blood. Once he'd flipped Ridley over, however, Spike reached out with his other claw, grabbed Ridley's metal-clad wing bone, and yanked it out of the socket. Ridley tried to roar in pain, but his jaw was still held fast. Can't fly, Spike growled deep in his throat. When Ridley's tail lashed his face over his left eye, he grabbed the offending appendage near the base with his free hand. Can die! He barked, planting his hind claws in the small of Ridley's back and stretching with all his might. The crunch of metal, a sickening snap, and the tearing of flesh told the tale as Ridley was torn in half. Youth and primal rage had conquered experience and technology. Spike let off a roar of triumph, and slowly fell from the sky. Samus raced up to his side, worried for him, but he managed to stabilize himself just before he crashed, landing heavily but safely amongst the monoliths of the seal. "Spike, are you alright?" Samus asked worriedly. Spike nodded. "I'm okay," he mumbled, taking internal stock of his injuries. 5 broken ribs, deep gouges along both sides and the small of his back, strained wing muscles, slight tearing to the left flight tendon, and blood was still pouring into his left eye from the deep gash there. He could also feel a bit dizzy from the loss of blood. "I'll live," he corrected. "I mean, once I get into the impact crater, I can just chug some phase-in, right?" Samus sighed. "Ridley broke the seal," she explained. "I don't know if we can." Her words were cut off as the gateway opened itself, the blue light and spectral flames showing the way. "Guess they fixed it," Spike pointed out, nodding to the 12 Chozo spirits he could see within the monoliths, bowing respectfully to them. The pair entered the portal, and vanished into the impact crater. As soon as they arrived in a flash of purple, however, Spike suddenly started screaming in pain. "Spike!" Samus called out, shocked, rushing to his side. Her scan visor quickly gave her answers. The orange phase-in of the impact crater is of much higher concentrations than the normal blue phase-in. Its radiation is proportionately more intense. Spike's physiology cannot cope with the intensity of the radiation. As contact with orange phase-in will overload the protections of the phase-in suit, its mere presence is enough to cause harm to Spike, possibly lethal if exposure is prolonged. Before her eyes, blue light and ethereal flames sucked him away. "Spike!" she called out. "Hatchling!" a voice echoed in her mind. Samus fell silent. "Your hatchling cannot survive inside the impact crater, he cannot face the Great Worm alongside you this time. We have drawn him back to safety. We will see to his injuries and cleanse the harm of the Great Poison from his brief trip below, he will be well. Face the Great Worm free of concern." Sighing, Samus nodded. She recognized the voices of the Chozo spirits. In point of fact, this was the one from the Artifact of Truth, the one who had explained how Spike could handle blue phase-in without harm. Steeling herself and pushing her concern for Spike from her mind, she proceeded into the crater. Everyone stared in silence. You were okay, right Spike?" Twilight asked worriedly. Spike nodded. "More or less," he replied. Turning side on, he shifted his armor slightly with a mental command. Everpony gasped the scars exactly where the battle wounds he described became visible. The radiation caused an infection of the wounds. As a result, they never completely healed. The scars from my first battle will always remain. As the armor shifted back into position, he lifted his visor, revealing the one over his left eye, jagged and raised. The Chozo spirit were able to complete the healing, and could have excised the scars, but I didn't want them to. They told me I had the instincts and the heart of a warrior of the Chozo, that I did my mother's adopted people proud. He lowered the visor back into place. So I keep the scars, reminders that I'm not invincible, no matter how strong I've become. A very noble sentiment, Spike, Luna murmured. And one quite rare in our world's modern day. Samus smiled, stroking Spike's neck gently. He made me proud, too.